Hey everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder and chief editor at Healthcare IT Today. We're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in health IT. And our guest today is Russ Thomas, CEO at Availity. Welcome, Russ.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate you having me here today.
Yeah, excited to talk about a lot of really interesting action in the industry, and want to hear your insights and what you all are doing in that. But before we go there, tell us about yourself and Availity.
Yeah, great. Well, again, thanks for having me. I am the CEO at Availity. I've been at the company for longer than I care to admit. I came on board, I think, in 2008 and was Chief Operating Officer for several years under our founder CEO, a woman named Julie Clapstein, who's just fantastic, and then took over in 2012. So I've had a great run at the company. You know, the core of Availity is all day, every day, solving abrasion and friction points between providers and health plans. We do that through what is now the largest network in all of healthcare, with 3.5 million providers on that side of the ledger, and direct connected to 95% of all the health plans in the United States. And last year transacted something like $4.5 trillion of claims through our network. So,
wait, I thought we weren't interoperable.
Yeah, exactly.
Trillions.
There's tons of opportunity for improvement. So yeah.
That's fair. That's fair. I think it's always funny. We're sending trillions of claims, and we're not sharing data. It is a tough challenge.
Yeah.
For sure.
No, it's a great point.
But I mean, to that point, I'd love to hear your initial reaction to a big announcement, a joint announcement between AHIP, a bunch of major health plans. I think some of the
CMS
some of DC got involved in it,
exactly.
right? About transforming prior authorizations. They have a goal by 2027. What's your reaction to it? And maybe that timeline, 2027. What do you think?
So high level reaction. I love it. When we, the nature of our network is we serve both sides, the providers and the health plans. You talk to providers, and Auths are unquestionably in the top 2 or 3 pain points that they deal with all day, every day, right? It's hard to imagine that we're in 2025, we're still having this conversation, but we are. And from the plan's perspective, I did a panel today with 2 of my favorite health system rev cycle leaders and one of my favorite health plan colleagues from Elevance. And, I asked her point blank, I said, what percentage of your auths are, truly automated or electronic? It's like 20% today, give or take, that really come in an electronic format. Compare that to claims where it's 98%, right, is electronic. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We can talk about it, but I think an industry-wide call to action is super important. It coincides, of course, with the implementation of the CMS rules. So everyone's trying to get
if they weren't going to do it,
if they weren't going to do it, they sort of had to do it. The sort of cautionary note for me is compliance is great, but that's not enough, right? We've got to go way beyond what's required for compliance if you really want to automate those workflows and make them easy, abrasion-free, and ultimately drive patient delight in the way that care is approved by the health plans.
Interesting. I mean, talk to me a little bit about that, because it does align with the CMS final rule, to a large extent. So where do you see the most overlap, and where does it push the industry further than maybe what's being required by the rule?
So I'll just tell you what we're doing, right? Because I think we're sort of a good litmus test. So of the plans that were identified, that were named in it, 7 of those plans have already either been implemented or we're in implementation with them for our automated auth workflow, right? Wow. So what does that do? It's a FHIR-based platform that is an end-to-end auth review from submission through medical necessity determination, through health plan approval or denial, but through health plan review and back to the provider in under 90 seconds. Wow. Okay, so end to end, patient still standing at the desk, right, with a request, a review, an approval, and back. That's not what the mandate requires, right? The mandate is mandate just says you have to automate it, right? But you can still automate a process. It can take you days to complete. We do that leveraging AI in the consumption of our medical policy and the review of that medical policy. One of the really important things for us is, we believe that AI should not be used to make an approval. It should be used to inform and guide. So that's what we're doing today. But it turns out that the vast majority of auth requests are going to get approved anyway. So why not automate, the majority, the things we know are going to get approved, right? Make sure you've got the right medical documentation, the right supporting clinical documentation, so that the plan can make an informed review and approval. But we're at an 80% touchless rate today with it.
Interesting.
And that's where the industry needs to go with it. So that's
I think
how
a
we think
90-second, prior auth approval or denial.
Yeah.
I mean, the denial, understanding if there's a denial is valuable too, right?
For sure.
I think that's mind-blowing for some people, and the fact that you can do that, that's probably an important message as well. What do you think is maybe the biggest risk to this agreement kind of stalling out before real change happens, and 90 seconds is kind of the norm as opposed to the abnormal?
Yeah, and by the way, the vast majority are coming through in 20 seconds, so we're doing it that fast.
Makes sense.
The other important data point, though, so why hasn't it happened sooner? What's the risk? A concern varies by plan is, well, the easier you make it, the more utilization you'll get, right? Part of what happens today is it's frustrating, it's time consuming. Well, maybe I shouldn't do the thing that requires an authorization. Let me consider other options for this patient.
Sure.
So there's always been a concern that, well, the easier you make it to do an auth review, the more utilization you're going to get. One of the stats that we're proud of is we've seen no increase in utilization by automating it. In fact, if anything, it may have come down a little bit for certain, we call them ologies, but radiology, whatever it may be, oncology, the different ologies.
Interesting.
The other stat, though, to the point you just made that I'm probably most proud of is when there's a denial or when there is a no, the rate of appeal and reconsideration requests has dropped by 95%. So when we say no, the rate of grievance and appeal for the no is down by 95%.
That's fascinating.
So what's that tell you, right? We're still unpacking it because it's fairly new data, but what that says to us is, to the provider, knowing that they've submitted the right documentation up front, that it's gone through not a black box, but a very transparent medical necessity review, and that the payer has come back with a not now, there may be another step to take, or no, we're not going to authorize this. You're creating a transparent process, and that's what the providers have been looking for. So I'm super proud of the fact that utilization hasn't gone up, but that we're delivering an answer that the provider is willing to accept and not question, tells me a lot about that we're doing it right.
Yeah, that's a powerful perspective. In the press release that Availity issued about this, you talked about delivering on the goals that are laid out in this pledge. Tell me more about the Intelligent Utilization Management platform, how it works, and it sounds like you talked a bit about how it's already exceeding the goal of doing it so quickly. But tell us more about how it works.
So I think it's the right combination of tech and culture, is the way I think about it. Because one of the things that I believe is, technology can enable better processes, but there's a lot of culture that's been built into decades of bad administrative process, right? So I'll use just a real quick example, if you don't mind. I blew my knee out in February skiing, and went to my neighbor, who's my orthopedic surgeon, to get it looked at. And he's like, well, you need an MRI.
Okay.
So he takes me to the front desk to the young lady behind the desk and says, hey, we need to schedule Mr. Thomas for an MRI. He walks away and she goes, okay, Mr. Thomas, I'll call you probably sometime next week and to schedule an appointment. Because her culture is, it takes days to get an auth approved. So I'm standing at the counter, I'm like, hey, do me a favor, run it now. Because I know they're a Florida Blue.
Okay.
I'm a Florida Blue member, and I'm in Florida, right? So I know what they're going to do. So she laughs and like, look, that's not going to work. And I said, do me a favor, just humor me, right? And she could tell I wasn't going to go away.
It's a business, understanding.
Yeah, exactly.
If it fails, at least I learned something.
Yeah, exactly. So I watch as she calls the imaging center. They own it, right? It's their own MRI center. And seriously, not a minute later, she looks up at me and she's like, how about tomorrow at 1 p.m.? Okay. I'm like, fantastic, done. But my point of that is the tech, we know the tech works, but we've got to evolve the culture, particularly I would say on the provider side, so that there has to be, you've got to train and re-educate a lot of people who've done things old school for a long time, that there's actually a better way to accomplish the result. So I think that can stall it out, right? I mean, if you're not getting an ROI by implementing this kind of tech, that stalls out. The way we've implemented it today is non-B2B. So today, provider who wants to run that auth request is going into our multi-payer portal. We call it Essentials, but that's where you go to do that. That's not a good result. We went there because we knew we could deliver to 90% of the market out of the box. But the right next step is for us to finish building the APIs so that all the EMRs and EHRs and imaging platforms can consume that API and submit the request right out of that authorization workflow, right? But so today, they're submitting the request in our application, our solution. That's coming through to us, hitting our tech, hitting our Auth AI, we call it, but our Auth AI workflow, bouncing the request up against the medical policy and leveraging our AI to make a recommendation to the payer, where they also have our workflow tool, directly into the UM department, utilization management team at the payer, who is in real time looking at it, looking at the recommendation, which is typically a yes recommendation, and sending a response back through us directly to the provider. So think about that, right? We're at an 80% touchless rate already, and it's not the best workflow. It ought to be coming right out of the EHR, going to the payer through us that way.
Yeah, it's great to see you're headed that way. I think it's also interesting that Availity has a dual-sided network that's helping the payers and the providers. Tell me more about how they work together to kind of. I kind of feel like you need both sides to effectively address prior authorization, but talk about
absolutely have to have both sides. So our little joke internally is when we launch a thing into the market, you got to make sure that everybody gets a cookie, right? That's Rob Laumeier, who's my head of AI. The guy's just brilliant. And it's his expression. He goes, everybody has to get a cookie. So think about auth, right? What's the cookie the provider gets? I'm getting a real-time, I'm able to do 80% of it touchless now. And B, I'm getting a real-time response. Well, that's a great cookie from the provider's perspective. They'll do that all day long. Same thing on the payer side, right? If 80% of the auths coming in are literally real-time reviews, then I can deploy my very talented, very expensive clinical teams to the auth requests that really do require that next level of medical review by a professional. And frankly, in a lot of cases, requires some collaboration with the patient and with the provider to make sure that you're really thinking through the care plan, the right way for the patient. We got a really cool program. Sorry, I talked too much, but we got a really cool program we're going to launch later this year that is an end-to-end condition review program, right? And we're doing breast cancer.
Oh, wow.
Because it's a super complex condition. It's, has a lot of emotion tied up with it, right?
Really important.
So we're launching a program with one of our payers to do an end-to-end breast cancer treatment program that takes it from initial diagnosis through recommendation, through treatment, through whatever follow-up there may be, and gives approvals every step, prior approvals every step of the way based upon a care plan that's pre-approved between the provider and the health plan, so that as the patient, every time I come back in for my next imaging or my next whatever it may be, I'm not having to wonder, is this going to be approved today? So I think that's really cool, and I think that's where that's the next iteration of what we're going to do.
That's interesting because my dad's actually dealing with cancer, and some of it's just the unknown. And is it going to be approved? And can you even? And the doctor can't give you info because you don't have it. So
and it has to be adaptable, right? Because conditions on the ground never remain exactly as you planned for. So you got to be prepared to change with that. So, but tech, my view is, tech enables caregivers to have that kind of flexibility in the way they're caring for their patients, and take things that I love the old Rumsfeld book, known unknowns kind of things, right? It just lets you turn a lot of things into knowns that going into a process may be unknown to you.
Interesting. So what would you say, distinguishes your approach from, say, the delegated utilization management vendors or even kind of traditional predictive models?
It's a good question. So our system can absolutely be integrated with the delegated vendors for payers who are, staying with that model. Fantastic, right? You're automating, if you think about it, utilization management, whether it's done by a delegated vendor or by the payer directly, still a lot of it's the same thing. It's just, where's the risk lying, right? So we absolutely can work with the delegated vendors to automate their workflows and their processes as well. I will tell you, ours is not a predictive model. It is a model based upon the payer-specific medical policy and the patient-specific conditions. Now, the AI is obviously learning. The more and more of these we do, the more and more it's learning, and so the recommendations theoretically gain a lot more credibility over time because they are based upon that many more cases.
Sure.
But it is a patient-specific. It's not predicting, what to do for one patient based on what's happened to a lot of other patients. It is a patient-specific review through the payer's medical policy with a recommendation tied to that.
Interesting. Sounds like more machine learning versus generative AI.
There's a fair amount of machine learning built into it as well.
Yeah. Hallucinations and machine learning.
Well, that's the goal, right? Is to and in fact, look, ours is not a Gen AI based product, right? Gen AI we think is absolutely fabulous for non-clinical decision-making processes, but ours is an analytic, AI platform that is making a recommendation to an actual
based on
clinician.
The actual policies.
Exactly, based on the actual policies and the patient-specific parameters.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what have you seen kind of from the payer clients, and how are they responding to kind of this announcement? It's a kind of an interesting moment that everyone said, "Hey, let's solve this."
So it's early, right? It's we're sitting here a day after the AHIP announcement. I can tell you that our plans that have signed up with us are, I think, have a head start on everyone else.
They're like, we're there.
They're kind of like, okay, great.
And
we're on the way, right? It's a journey. Logically, we started with the conditions, the ologies that are the highest volume, and to some degree, I would argue, sort of the lowest complexity. So imaging is a great place to start. Huge volume, reasonably low complexity, right, to imaging. We're moving into oncology. We're doing sleep. We're looking at behavioral, right? Because there's a whole lot of ologies to be done from here. Genetic testing, right? We're looking at some really cool opportunities with genetic testing, which, for example, provides a whole host of different kinds of questions. What comes first, the chicken and the egg, right? Does the genetic test come first, or does the condition that may or may not have a genetic marker that would help the treatment of that condition come first?
It can be both.
It can be both. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more complex ologies to do than we've done, but candidly, just the ones we've gotten out already are getting to 75-80% of all authorization requests.
That's awesome. As you look at this kind of period of time, the announcement, everything that's happening, it really is a compliance mandate. 2027 is coming quickly.
Yeah.
But it feels like it's also kind of a point of differentiation. So what does that look like in practice for both the payers and the providers when it comes to not just being compliant, which of course is essential, but also differentiating themselves from others?
Compliance mandates worry me.
Yeah.
Just being candid, right? I can cite other examples, payer directory, for example, where, hey, there's a mandate that you have to do it, and you get what you pay for, right? So yes, we have price transparency. Exactly, right? So there is certainly risk that some cohort of payers will go, okay, I'm going to meet the compliance mandate, and that's all I'm going to do. I don't think that's going to be very satisfying for providers. And I think at some point it becomes a point of differentiation among health plans, right? Authorization isn't just frustrating for providers and payers, it's frustrating for patients. If I'd had to leave my doc's office, right, and go home and figure out when to schedule my image, right, my MRI, it's kind of frustrating to not be able to go and do it. So I think that certainly the payers that we're working with on this are looking at it as a way to create some competitive differentiation at the same time that they are driving more provider satisfaction in their business relationship, with their provider networks, and frankly bringing something very valuable to their patients as well. I can't tell you exactly what the number is, but our NPS score on this thing is just through the roof, right? Because it just works.
It's
That's how I
interesting
think
you
about it.
talked about it from the patient perspective, which is
Yeah.
extraordinary. I know doctors that are sick of waiting on hold with the payer
Oh,
that
God.
want this immediately.
Yeah.
But I actually heard, here at this, we're at the HFMA conference, and I heard some RCM providers
Yeah.
from the stage say, hey, the payers that are a pain to work with, we're reducing how we work with them. And the ones that
Oh,
are
yeah.
really bad, we're calling them up and saying,
We
maybe
may not
we
take you
shouldn't work
anymore.
with
Yeah.
you at all.
No, I think you're exactly
And
right.
so I
Yeah.
think that's what your point is.
I
right?
do. I think that what I have found over decades of working with providers is providers certainly care about top line revenue,
Sure.
but they really care about yield, right? If it costs me 90 cents to collect $1, I don't care how high the billing, the rate is. If it costs me 90 cents to collect it, that's a bad deal. So at Availity, what we think about all day, every day is how do we help our providers improve yield? Margin, call it what you want to call it, right? But how do we help them improve yield? That if I bill $1, how do I collect $1 as inexpensively as possible? So here's an interesting stat for you to think about. I told you at Availity last year, we billed $4.5 trillion of claims, some number like that. If you look on the other side of that transaction at the actual remittances back to providers, it's a third of that,
Wow.
right? A third to 40% of that. So I scratch my head and I go, well, where'd the other 3 trillion go, right? I mean, it's not fraud, it's not abuse, it's complexity in the system today, right? Some of it, there's no silver bullet. Some of it's patient responsibility.
Sure.
Some of it's wrong plan build. Some of it's, I didn't build the contract correctly. There are adjustments, as you know, all over the place. But in my perfect world, and I'm a non-repentant optimist, wouldn't it be great to live in a world where a provider bills $1 and for a reasonable administrative fee, running their business, 3%, 4%, whatever it may be, they collect $1, right? Not I collect 40 cents on the dollar, but I knew I was only going to get 40 cents when I billed it, but I still had to bill the $1. I mean, it's 2025, right? Enough of this sort
we
of,
should be doing better.
we got to be doing better than that. So we measure a lot of things in healthcare. We measure clean claim rate. We tell everybody we're 98+% clean claim rate. Does that mean 98% gets paid right the first time at the rate it was billed? Absolutely not. So I think we got to look at some of these metrics that matter and really challenge ourselves to do better. And I think Auths is a great example of where to do that, right? I mean, to me, it should be as simple as my doc thinks I need a scan of my knee. I think he's probably right because I know it hurts. He orders it, it gets approved in real time, and he gets the result back so he can schedule what's next.
Yep.
And that was my experience, which is fantastic.
It's amazing that it's happening. And, I think it's interesting. We're at a moment in time where this needs to be solved because so many people are suffering because of it. And there's so much inefficiency.
And economically, we can't afford to continue on this trend that we're on, right? And do I think that, solving administrative workflow problems in healthcare is going to save $1 trillion a year? And no, but I think it's a big number. I think it's hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of costs that we can take out of the system that can either be returned back to the system, right? Back to the person ultimately paying for the care, which is you and I as patients, or frankly, some of it's going to get taken to profit margin and help providers and plans and all the other intermediaries run, more effective businesses.
Provide better service.
Yeah.
Russ, this is really interesting, and I love that we're pushing this forward. I can't wait to see where we're at a year and a half from now.
Yeah.
But I love that Availity is not waiting.
Thanks, John.
So that's really great.
We don't really wait very well. So.
I love that. Yeah. And thanks everyone for watching and listening.
Thank you.
If you want to find more great healthcare IT content like this, be sure to check it out at healthcareittoday.com or search for Healthcare IT Today on your favorite podcast application. Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, John.